had been an advance man in the '68 campaign. I got a call in the middle of the summer saying, "Do you want to come be a volunteer advance man for Richard Nixon?" And it sounded like a lot of fun. And it was Ehrlichman, and he said, he's going to be the next president. During the '68 campaign, there was a guy named Booth Turner, and his job was to organize a train. We thought at some point during the campaign, the typical airplane stop and rally at an airport would get to be old stuff, so we needed something to be more exciting. And Booth Turner had figured out a train, borrowed fancy railroad cars from every railroad. The rally looked even bigger than what it was. And I think it was Dashler, Ohio or something, where my fellow Americans, it was Nixon and Pat and the two girls, and I think David Eisenhower was on that trip. And standing behind them were Bill Duncan, who was the Secret Service guy, and Bob Haldeman. And in those days, you put the microphone and you clipped him up on the railing around the back of the observation car, and just as he was about to starting to speak, the train lurched forward and the mic started popping off and the train went down the track. And there was nobody on the train except Haldeman and Ehrlichman, or maybe just Ehrlichman. He and Duncan ran through 14 cars and got to the engineer, and I wasn't there, but I can imagine they said something like, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And it seemed that one of the great pranksters in the Democratic Party, a guy named Dick Tuck, had snuck into the locomotive and said, "I'm a member of the FBI that's part of this supportive staff, and we've just learned that there's been a threat on the candidate's life. And if you're any kind of patriotic American, you're going to get this train out of here, and you're going to get it out of here right now." So this little man, and of course he was shocked to see and I think Tuck also said, "And anybody that tries to stop you, probably part of that conspiracy." So this little guy was chugging down the tracks, and the Secret Service guy and Duncan came up, and the little engineer turned around and hit him right in the jaw. Well, finally they subdued him, and the train backed into the station, and of course that was the story. Bill Sapphire and Pat Buchanan and Bryce Harlow and Marty Anderson and I were, and I think David Keene, we were all loaned to Agnew out of the cadre of supporters of Nixon from the '68 campaign for the off-year '70 campaign. And Agnew was, it was a smaller entourage. We didn't have the same kind of, press corps following us around. It was the last of the really intimate campaigns. And we went to 46 or 47 states in a chartered airplane, and you get to know somebody pretty well as a result of that. So yeah, and then after that, Sapphire and Buchanan went back to their respective posts in the White House. I did briefly, but then I was asked by both Nixon and Agnew to stay on and do some of the structuring of Agnew's participation in the '72 campaign. And the whole theory, you'll recall, is, committee to re-elect the president. And the president was so busy being the president that he didn't have time to go out and do all the campaigning. And that was left to Agnew. So we were in all 50 states. And the fact that we ran against McGovern may have had something to do with the margin of our victory. Buchanan told a lot of funny stories. One of which was, he said, I was in charge of briefing books for the president, and I would anticipate what the questions were going to be. And one time I put together a briefing book, and he called me the next day and he said, "You did a wonderful job. You anticipated every one of those questions with a proper answer, and I felt very well prepared. Thank you very much, Pat." Pat said, "Gee, I was feeling pretty great about that." He said, "However, you had a number of other questions that they didn't ask." He said, "Well, yeah, that's probably true." He said, "Well, next time leave those out." And he was a very interesting guy. He certainly didn't get elected on his charm and good looks, but he probably knew more about the political process than anyone. And I mean, there are lots of stories about old Milhouse sitting on the bench at Whittier College, which wasn't exactly competing for a Rose Bowl slot. 12 guys went out for football. One guy got to sit on the bench, and that was Milhouse. So I think he was a tremendous achiever, and in a variety of ways that sort of made up for some of his insecurities, quite honestly. he would, to emphasize things, he was pretty profane. He'd say, and we got to go get those blanks and those blanks. And I was thinking, I was in my late 20s. I was thinking, the President of the United States is using pretty graphic language to describe. And out of that came, the enemies list. So there was that kind of diabolical mentality. But I think people that worked for him understood how much he knew about the process and what a great patriot he was. And if you look at what he did with China, if you look at what he did with the strategic arms limitation in Russia, and Kissinger clearly laid all these things out, reminded us all of the enormous contributions Nixon made to world peace when he was president. You remember why. This was a dedicated, patriotic American who obviously made a mistake during Watergate, and it was not really the act of the simple burglary by a bunch of jerks. It was this part of his personality that he just didn't ever want anybody to be able to call him a failure, or that he got caught doing something wrong. So it was really the cover-up that got all my friends in trouble.